Extension 720 with Milt Rosenberg on 720 WGN.
Two types of ripoff under discussion tonight. In the second hour, we talk with an old friend, Detective Bruce Wallstad, who's an expert on the con rackets and the ways in which con men separate us from our money. In the first hour, however, my guest is Amy Ridenour, who is the president and chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research, and her organization is concerned with many particular indignities that are visited upon us, many of them by the government of the United States. And one particular indignity involves, of all things, light bulbs. Amy, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And do please explain why I and all who are listening by January 1st will not be able to buy an ordinary light bulb.
Well, it's because the Congress of the United States in 2007 passed a bill which requires standards be met by the ordinary typical incandescent light bulb, the one that Thomas Alva Edison invented, that they simply cannot meet. They have to be 30% more efficient. You can't make that bulb 30% more efficient, so people will have to stop selling them in the United States. Next January 1, it's for the 100-watt bulbs, which, of course, are the most common ones. You'll have 2 more years if you want to get a 40-watt bulb, but then they'll be gone, too.
But, of course, substituting for those is a wonderful thing now available to us and being heavily marketed. The CFL, the compact fluorescent light bulb. Isn't that a full answer to our problem?
Well, for some people it is. The CFLs can be used. Some folks have found that they last longer. They're said to last longer. There's a couple of problems with CFLs, though. Some of the small problems are that they have a different kind of light. It's less of a spectrum. It's a cold, sort of brighter, but less warm light.
These are essentially, we know them as fluorescent bulbs, those long string-like things that we clip into kitchens or other places. We're already familiar with fluorescent tubes as they are.
Exactly. They're just small versions of those that can fit in most incandescent light bulb fixtures. So some people don't like the kind of light. The second problem with them, which is a little more serious, is that some people have health effects. These health effects can be anything from migraines, because these lights flicker, to skin disorders. People with lupus and so forth sometimes, not always, can have problems with these lights. Much more serious concern, but possibly not even the most serious concern, is that people who are prone to having seizures can find that their chance of having a seizure goes up. Not everyone's, but some people, their chance of having a seizure increases if they stay around fluorescent lights. Again, the flickering. And then finally, there's the problem that the bulbs contain mercury. I'm sure we've all heard on the news a few times about mercury scares because of a broken thermometer or whatever. There's not as much mercury in a light bulb, a CFL, as in a thermometer. That said, there is enough mercury in one of these bulbs that there is a 10 or 11-step process recommended by the Environmental Protection Agency if you break one of these bulbs in your home.
10 or 11 steps.
Yeah.
What are they quickly reviewed?
Well, I'd have to pull them up to have them all memorized, but it basically comes down to things like picking things up with sticky tape, driving the old bulb to Home Depot or another place for disposal, not vacuuming, opening all the windows of your house for 5 or 6 hours to let the mercury escape, things of that nature.
If you drop and break a light bulb.
Exactly. And a concern I have, and I never see this mentioned by government websites and spokespeople, is people are supposed to take these bulbs to a special place for disposal.
Fat chance.
Exactly. People just aren't going to bother, which means there's going to be mercury all over landfills. I mean, it almost sounds silly, but garbage men are going to be picking up mercury-laden trash for their entire careers.
Well, what in the world possessed the members of Congress, both in House and Senate? This bill was voted in a few years ago, and it's called the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. 60 or 65% in each House voted for this bill. Why?
There are two main causes. The first one, which I think was most decisive, is that energy industry lobbyists wanted it. Incandescent light bulbs are very inexpensive. Here in Maryland, I spend 30 cents a piece for a 100-watt bulb. There's not much profit on those. The factories for most of them were here in the United States, with Americans getting American wages. CFLs and other alternatives cost a lot more, some twice as much. There are light bulbs that are suggested as alternatives that cost $60 or $70.
Well, now, the old Roman question applies. Cui bono? Who profits?
General Electric, probably number one. Philips is another one. General Electric is one of the biggest lobbying firms in the United States. Last year, they spent $39 million lobbying the Congress of the United States. That doesn't even count states. When you spend $39 million lobbying, you're pretty powerful. And they can make a lot. I don't have the number, but they can make a lot more money selling compact fluorescents made in China at the China wage rate compared to 30-cent incandescents made in the Midwest somewhere.
The special angle always shows up if you dig a little. You know, I want to share with you and with our listeners a quick story about my own experience with mercury. Indeed, I was shaking a thermometer one day. A grandchild was staying with us and maybe had a fever, and I was shaking the thermometer, and though I've shaken thermometers all my life, this one slipped out of my hands and fell to the bathroom floor and cracked open. And there was mercury in the little bits of it in circular form that you could see in drops on the floor. And I wondered, what the hell do I do now? And I called the poison control or something like that, and they said, that's a very dangerous thing, sir, and you better get in touch with one of the outfits that cleans up on that. And they gave me a reference, and I called that outfit, and they came. 3 guys burst into the apartment in protective suits of some kind, and they spent about 2 or 3 hours doing everything around the house. And for that broken thermometer, I paid about $900.
Wow.
Now, to be sure, the bulbs don't have as much mercury in them as a thermometer, but still, if you got kids in the house and you break a bulb and some of the little droplets of mercury are visible on the floor, you're going to be very concerned.
And you should be very concerned. And when our Environmental Protection Agency says to you, after you do the 10 or 11 steps, it depends on whether it's a hard surface or a carpet.
Yes.
The next time you vacuum, the next 3 or 4 times you vacuum, you must open your windows for 5 or 6 hours so the mercury that becomes airborne can go out the window. That tells me there's an awful lot of mercury in the bulb in terms of what a human being can take.
Now, I am heartened to learn from a release that your organization sent out just today that there's a bill pending in Congress, and it will be voted upon within, I guess, just a week or so, which may reverse this whole thing. But whether it has a real chance of passing is a question that seems to me all the more urgent. Also equally urgent is the commercials that we've got to stop for. After that, let's talk about what's going on in Congress right now concerning this burden that Congress put upon us a few years ago. Directly back to Amy Ridenour of the National Center for Public Policy Research after this.
Extension 720 with Milt Rosenberg on 720 WGN.
And directly back to Amy Ridenour, the president and chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research, which is based in the Washington area, and does considerable work on many matters, many of them having to do with the indignities that the government imposes upon us. When I first heard of the banning of incandescents and that they were going to push upon us rather dangerous CFLs, I was outraged. But my outrage varied. There's so much else to be outraged about, I'd sort of forgotten the issue. And now I am reminded of it by the release from your organization today. And I'm reminded as well that unless what the Congress did a few years ago is turned around, we will begin to be required to use these CFLs, or there's one other substitute you can use, equally uncomfortable, I think. But all of that will begin on January 1st of next year, unless all of this is reversed. Has there been much national outrage over the last 3 or 4 years on this?
It's simmering. It doesn't get national attention. It does get some decent attention on radio and on the Internet. It's as if people are aware of it. They're not happy about it. But with unemployment the way it is and spending and so forth, it's like you said, it's not their number one concern.
But it is a very legitimate concern. What's happening in Congress right now?
Well, there has been a movement to repeal this. Next week, perhaps as early as Monday, there will be a vote in the House of Representatives on a bill. It's H.R. 2417. short named the Bulb Act, to repeal the new standards, in other words, repeal the de facto ban. It's expected to pass. For one thing, at this point, most of the Republicans, maybe even all of them, in the House are in favor of the repeal.
Who are the main sponsors, or for that matter, the authors of the bill?
Well, this particular one is coming from Mr. Fred Upton, who's from Michigan. He's the chairman of the Commerce and Energy Committee. And the irony there is that he was one of the prime sponsors of the ban in the first place. And in fact, when he wanted to become chairman of this particular committee in January when the Republicans took control again, he had to promise people that he would get the light bulb ban reversed if he was allowed to be chairman. And so now he's fulfilling his promise by trying.
Well, he's a man of his word.
Apparently.
But also he was very foolish in moving the original bill.
A foolish man of his word.
Is it a Republican-Democrat difference?
He is a Republican. When this bill passed the first time, meaning the ban, it was more Democrat than Republican, but it was pretty close.
But the cover story that they were using was that this was also a way of saving energy, and thus this was a green fostering kind of operation.
Exactly, and the lobbyists were very clever there. They went in saying not, we're going to make more money, but this will be good for the environment because we will have to generate less electricity. And that's, almost completely true. There are certain exceptions. For instance, because an incandescent is warmer than a CFL, in wintertime, you actually have to heat your house less if you use incandescents. But that's not really a big issue. They're right. They do save energy. That said, should the federal government be deciding that all these health dangers are worth it? And just to add a little bit to that, in Europe, which had the ban a little bit before us, the European Union, they sold it on the notion that they would need it to adhere to the Kyoto Global Warming Treaty. So it's all part and parcel of the anti-energy, let's save the planet's temperatures thing. But, honestly, it's not going to affect the temperature of the planet no matter what happens here.
Well, and it sounds so dysfunctional in terms of all the other consequences. It really does endanger health, it seems to me.
Yes.
And that's a pretty basic consideration.
Well, yes, and, you do have the irony of the environmental movement lobbying against mercury emissions from power plants. At the same time, they're mandating mercury in our homes.
We well remember the wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, who says quite simply that government governs best which governs least. We have a government which increasingly governs more and more, that is to say, intrudes into our lives in every possible way. I suppose you really can make your way in a new career in Washington if you could think of yet another way to intrude into people's lives which no one else has thought of.
It's absolutely true.
Most of the ways have been used up, but there must still be some things that are unregulated.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the other things our group has criticized in recent weeks has been bans on salt shakers in restaurants.
Oh, my God.
Do we really need the government to tell us that? I don't think so, but some in government do.
Is there a law or is it a regulation which now bans salt shakers in restaurants? I didn't know that.
This is a new one, and it's primarily now on the local level, like in New York City, and it hasn't passed. But it's being brought up by councilmen, and not just in New York, San Francisco, the usual leaders. But, it'll be mainstream in 5 years if we don't stop it now.
What else is in that category?
Well, I go back a little bit. Remember when you could, excuse my indelicacy, flush the toilet once?
Yes.
There are so many things of this nature that I can't hardly even think of them all.
Well, they can't spy on us with regard to toilet flushing, can they?
Not yet, as far as I know.
But what was the government suggesting we do about flushing toilets?
Well, they said we'll save clean water because we won't use as much of it if we have low-flow toilets. But the idea, two things happened, really, and one of them's almost funny, except it's expensive. Obviously, people flushed twice, which used more water than the original toilets. The second thing that happened is the cities, and this was most notably happening in San Francisco, there wasn't enough water in the sewage system to make everything flow. So they had multi-million-dollar problems to fix just to keep everything moving the way it used to run just fine.
I didn't catch on at first. I remember now, and I see what you're talking about. They actually changed the regulations concerning what kinds of toilets could be made. Was that it?
Exactly. They said you can only have X amount, I don't remember the numbers, of water in a toilet.
So these are comparatively empty toilets.
Exactly. And I think it was 93 years. I could be wrong, but it was about that period of time. And at this point, there's actually a very nice retail market for old used toilets. When people tear down an old house, they take the toilets and sell them because they're legal.
Just as lots of people, including you, I gather, have been buying incandescent bulbs by the hundreds.
Yes. Well, we have a circumstance in our household, although I'd recommend this for anybody who does choose incandescents. I mean, I understand not everybody wants to. I just think they should have the choice. But in our house, we have two reasons to really want incandescents, and that's our son, Jonathan. He's 11. He's severely autistic, which means he doesn't understand that you don't knock over a lamp. He's not a naughty boy. He just, the consequence of breaking a lamp, he just doesn't get it. So being an 11-year-old boy running around a house with energy, he knocks over a lamp once in a while. Well, when it's an incandescent, it's broken glass. You move them out of the room, you pick it up, you vacuum, you double-check, you're done. When there's mercury on there, it's a whole new thing. You have the mega steps and all that, but even then you're not sure.
Just like my memory of the broken thermometer.
Exactly. So that's the first thing. And to us, it's a big deal because, pardon me, if you break a bulb in the same playroom, and even the government will tell you don't put them in playrooms, they just won't let you buy the alternative. But you break it in the same place over and over, how much mercury's in there. And I don't even want to emphasize just my son. I mean, other people. I mean, how many fraternity houses are going to have parties, break a few light bulbs every Saturday night, and do all the cleanups?
On Animal House night, yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's not happening.
Oh, listen, I've got to stop right now to stay on schedule, and we've got to take care of a newscast. Then we want to go to the phones to see what folks have to say about all of this. So we're opening the lines right now. The number, of course, is 312-591-7200. 312-591-7200. We'll be directly back to Amy Ridenour and on to your calls with questions for her, or for that matter, with reports on your own experience and your own thoughts regarding the great light bulb dilemma, as we continue right after the update on the news from Dave Schwann.
Milt Rosenberg and Extension 720 on 720 WGN.
And we return directly to Amy Ridenour. And with us on the first line is Steve in Fort Collins, Colorado. Good evening, sir.
Hi, how are you?
Just fine.
Great. I just wanted to mention an experience that the city of Fort Collins had a couple of years back, and that is they decided to go green and install CFLs in many of the stoplights and streetlights in Fort Collins. And that was working okay until winter came along, and they started getting all the winter snows. And because the CFLs produce much less heat, the snow would immediately cover the lights, and the lights would continue to be covered, making them invisible. And so what they did at first was they sent people out to brush off the lights continually whenever snows came so that they would be visible again. But what they ultimately decided to do was to install electric heaters inside the lights, which, of course, totally negated any energy savings that was made by replacing the incandescent bulbs with CFLs.
And where do they stand now?
So far as I know, they've stuck by their decision to use the heaters. So they're really, at the very least, no better off than they were.
Often a penny saved is a dollar lost.
Yeah, especially in a bureaucracy.
Yeah. Your reaction to that particular story, Amy Ridenour?
Well, I think that's gone on in some other places, too. I know there's at least one case where a young lady was killed in a car accident because she went through a light because she absolutely didn't see it.
Oh, my.
And you can save quite a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars in electric bills in some of these cities. But as this gentleman, Steve, just said, you end up having to do so many things, to fix it that you don't save anything. In fact, come to think of it, the young lady that I know of that was killed in Illinois. So, we really just have to think things through.
Our thanks to the first caller. I must tell you that I discovered only a few nights ago that the little lamp I have on the desk from which I am speaking, we have lots of lights, of course, in a large studio, but I've got a little desk lamp, and it has one of those CFLs in it. I don't know who put it in there, and it's only a fairly recent development. You should really describe the way in which they are internally coiled, the looks of this, so that everyone knows that they've got a CFL when they see this particular sort of design.
Well, it looks a little bit like, if I can think of an analogy, the tail of a pig, curlicue.
Yes.
So just to think, if it looks like something Thomas Alva Edison invented, it's not a CFL.
And if it curls around and around on itself, it is.
Exactly.
312-591-7200. The number, some lines available. If you've been trying to reach us, make another quick try. Somebody will get through. And we go next to Len. Good evening. You're on the air.
Yes, this is Len Webster.
Yes, sir.
I happen to be relatively expert in this field, and there's another issue with CFLs that's not recognized or talked about, which surprises me, and that is the fact that a CFL is similar to a computer. It's actually got a switch mode power supply in it. That's one of the reasons there's a flicker, because it doesn't use all the power coming to it, which means that it creates harmonics. Harmonics are a form of energy that's sent back to the power company because it's not used. So there is actually a cost to the power companies because they actually have to push more power into the system to get a CFL to burn because it's returning some of the power. If you're familiar with a line neutral system, the way it works. And I happen to own a number of patents that correct harmonic filtration at much larger levels than what you're talking about in a CFL. But and that's something that should also be added to the negative impact. The other funny part about this is an incandescent light bulb, on the other hand, is a filter for harmonics. In other words, this energy that's sent back to the power company. So it actually negates some of that return of energy that's typically coming from computers. So you are actually increasing the harmonic content going back to the utility companies, which is meaning they have to push more energy into the system. That's never quantified. And Amy, if you would sometime like to talk about this, I can talk in great detail to you off the air.
Sounds interesting.
Well, it's I deal with this every day of the year, so know it very well.
Well, and why don't you be in touch with Amy then?
That's what I would think makes sense.
Why don't you give your email address, Amy?
Well, certainly. It's Ridenour at National...
Hold on just one second. Let me just get to where I can write it down, and I will respond to you tomorrow.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'll
go ahead. I've got a pen and pencil.
Okay. It's A. Ridenour, R-I-D-E-N-O-U-R.
R-I-D-E-N-O-U-R. O-U-R.
At nationalcenter.org.
nationalcenter.org.
Okay. And with that, Sarah, thanks very much for your contribution, and we'll go quickly to the next caller at 312-591-7200. Sandy has joined us. Good evening.
Hi. I'm so interested in this topic, and I'm a designer, and I work with lighting, and I work with toilets, and I've been in business for 30 years, and I think there's part of the law that you might be missing. I don't disagree with you about the CFLs. I've been saying this ever since this push has been on. But there's two things that I believe you might be overlooking in terms of the law making us do something. And number one is, in my business, color and the color of lighting is very important. And so just forgetting the danger of CFLs, the color has never been great. But what this law does, and I've been to many seminars because of this law and the changes that are coming with regards to lighting, is that it's pushing better lighting down the line, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but down the line, LEDs and other kinds of lighting supplies, we call them lamps, light bulbs, lamps in the industry, are going to be much better, cleaner.
What does What does LED stand for?
LED stands for light emitting diode, and it's a form of light. It's very clean. There's no waste byproduct. In addition to which, the law does not ban incandescents in 2012. it puts a ban on, as they're phasing it out, they're going to have to stop making 100-watt incandescent bulbs, and so on down the line. But there are incandescents. There are low-voltage lighting. There is halogen lighting that is still being manufactured and made.
Where are they being manufactured?
Oh, they're being manufactured all over the place. Sylvania manufactures them. Those are not being phased out now.
Hold on one second, though. Amy, are those being manufactured by Sylvania in this country or in China?
GE.
The halogen bulbs are being manufactured. They're different.
And the low voltage. The low voltage uses much less electricity.
And of course, at the beginning of the show, I did specify.
Right, and I missed the beginning of the show.
Okay.
Now, as to the law, let's take the toilets. Years ago, when they first passed that law about low-flow toilets, absolutely correct, the toilets were horrible, okay? Everyone's house they put them into complained because they had to flush. Now, the low-flow toilets are fantastic, and they're saving millions and millions. And my point is, as annoying as it is, these changes, without a law in place, these changes would never happen. The changes in lighting would never happen. And the changes in the amount of water...
Well, you've made a rather clear presentation, and clearly you have strong feelings. Let's get some response from Amy Ridenour.
Okay.
Certainly, and indeed, this is what industry says in ads it is running right now, asking congressmen to vote against the repeal. That you get more choices if you take away some of the ones you have now, then industry will invent some new things. Let me bring up an analogy.
Okay.
The government says to us, and has said now for about 3 decades, that we'll have more choices and better mileage in our cars if they force us, or force manufacturers, to only sell cars that reach certain mileage standards. Now, the government's own figures say that about 2,000 Americans have died every year for the past 25 years because they've been in lighter cars, they hit a tree, they hit a wall, they hit a sign, and they die. But our cars get more mileage. Now, I ask you, would you choose to have your children or your mother killed to have a better choice in a toilet or a light bulb, or a car? Because that's the actual choice we actually face.
The point is well made.
Lighting and toilets is different than a car, number one.
We'll grant that, ma'am, and I fear we must stop right now because we still serve capitalism here, and we are late for some commercials. And then directly back to Amy Ridenour, President and Chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research, and back to the great light bulb question after these words.
Extension 720 with Milt Rosenberg on 720 WGN.
And quickly back to the phones. We've got about 10 minutes still left on this first hour, and here is the next caller, that one being Julie. Good evening. You're on the air.
Good evening. I can't believe you brought this topic up tonight. Earlier today, I was out with my mother shopping. Her washing machine is broken, so we were going to various stores looking at washing machines. And today was the first time I ever heard that starting next year, you can only buy washing machines with a certain level of water in them. And I'm appalled now at how much our government has stepped into our everyday life. I mean, it goes with the light bulbs, with the toilets, and now our washing machines.
What did they tell you at the washing machine location? How much reduction in the amount of water to be used in the washing machine?
Quite a bit. It looks lower than half of the level of water. I'm like...
It automatically shuts off at that level, does it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My goodness. Were you aware of that one, Amy?
I don't know a lot about the washing machines. I do know that they had to meet some energy standards, and nowadays you can't get them that run 100% hot water, which, of course, reduces efficiency. And I also know that they have regulations that reduce the ingredients in dishwasher soap so that people have started running the pots and pans cycle for even light dishes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just noticed, too, just recently, that my dishes don't get as clean in the dishwasher as they used to.
This is why.
That's why. Unbelievable.
Well, our friendly parent, the state, has arranged all of these things for our betterment somehow. Ma'am, thank you for the call.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the program.
Not at all. I do want to read you, Amy, and read to everybody an email I've got in front of me. This one says, when I hear stories such as heating the streetlights, I imagine a chorus of electrical engineers saying, told you so. It would appear that no engineers are consulted before these laws and regulations are enacted. Are independent and professional engineering organizations ever consulted? As a citizen and a consumer, I really don't want technical issues decided by unqualified policy wonks.
One of the things that happens when government gets big is that even well-meaning legislators don't have the time to investigate issues as much as they otherwise would. I don't doubt that a number of people voted for this thing in both parties thinking they were doing a good deed, including the guy that now wants to repeal it. But they don't have time when government's this big and meddlesome. I will also say, just on the point of experts, I agree with that. But it is also the case that some guys and women learn to game the system, like, 85% of all climate scientists say what they do to get grants rather than pure science. Now, I know that's another subject, but when government is huge...
We were debating that subject just last night on this program, as a matter of fact.
Okay, well, and it's a great one. But since it's not tonight, I'll only say this, that when government is so big, it creates incentive to have positions. Even the engineers sometimes get corrupted.
And with that, let's go quickly back to the phones. Brian is next up. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Unfortunately, I missed a lot of the program, and I will look for the podcast. And I don't know if you touched on this or not, but I know for a fact that the electrical utility industry has been one of the big proponents of CFLs because their strategy is, when our economy was growing rapidly, 8-10 years ago, they were stressed about upgrading our electrical distribution system because it's very heavily taxed and outdated and pretty worn out. And their strategy was to shed load. And I believe it's 30 to 40% of our electrical load is simply lighting. And they saw this as an easy way to shed load, and that bought the utility industry more time to upgrade their system. Like we here in Illinois, for instance, most of our nuclear reactors, power generating stations, are wearing out, and they're going offline. Most of the distribution systems, the transformers, the high tension lines, those are all wearing out too. And utilities did this to give them breathing room and to shift the load to the consumers without us really realizing it. And it's just something that never really gets talked about. Everybody gripes about it, but nobody looks at ComEd. And they're one of the big factors, along with every utility operation in the country, why we're experiencing this.
You're absolutely right. And, one of the problems we have is issues like this don't get discussed and debated, like the need to upgrade the grid, the need to have, in my opinion, more nuclear power plants. Other people would disagree with that. We'll talk about Casey Anthony till the cows come home, but talking about how we're going to heat or electrify our houses in 5 years, no, nobody cares.
Maybe we should have cable channels just for stupid people, and then we could have cable channels for smart people.
Works for me.
Have a good night.
Thank you, sir, for the call. Amy, let me ask you to explain how this particular issue is within a far larger set of concerns pursued by your organization, the National Center for Public Policy Research. In fact, what exactly is the scope of the activity of the National Center?
Well, the National Center, which people can visit at nationalcenter.org, is a free market conservative organization. We're 29 and a half years old, so we're looking forward to a birthday. And we work to educate the public about the problems caused by government interference in our lives and the advantages of using free market and limited government solutions to quite a few of our public policy problems.
I was looking at your website, obviously, just a few hours ago, and I'd never visited it before. Quickly, what are, say, 10 other such areas in which the same issue arises? Government interference, which actually would be far better handled by free market operations.
Well, a lot of your technological issues. I spoke earlier about mileage standards, where we don't, people would buy the cars they like because they either get good mileage or safety. We have, and this is one that probably you won't expect, the Endangered Species Act has actually got major problems with it that end up in killing species. That's because it's done, federal government says protect species, will take your land away and make you protect the species. So what people do is kill all the endangered species before the government can get there. Goodness knows it goes on quite a bit because we have quite a few energy restrictions going on because of the whole global warming debate, which kill jobs. You know, the irony we have with many jobs being lost because of regulation, we've got this huge debt limit controversy, problems paying for Medicare and Social Security into the future, and we're doing a lot of it to ourselves by stopping economic growth that we could have. But that gets into another thing where we talk about health care reform, where we're going to have a increasingly command and control healthcare system that is going to be forced, regardless of what they tell you, to sit down and say this or that isn't worth it in terms of cost. And that this or that may be the one medicine that has a chance of curing a person's form of cancer. So I don't know if I have 10 right off the top of my head, although I'll think of 30 as soon as we hang up. But right and left, when government is too big, then it can't handle solutions. Government's made up of people, and people are fallible. And the more tasks you give a person, the less good they're going to be at any one of them. That's just human life. So we have to decentralize, limit the government size, and let us, solve problems either on our own, if they're small, or at the local level where we can see the problem, see a solution, try it out, and fix it if it doesn't work.
Let me add one to your list, though I'm sure that probably your organization is quite involved in this as well, namely education. How about getting government either out of education or much less involved in education? Absolutely.
We have so many regulations. You know, you take a look at what it costs to do per child to do things. You know, one of our children, as I mentioned earlier, is a special ed student. I can't have a meeting at his school without 7 people present. Pardon me. The regulations simply specify that, you know, this sort of person has to be there and a note taker has to be there and so forth. And, you know, they've just got a million things that people have to do that get in the way of good teachers. They also have things getting in the way of firing bad teachers.
Now what you need, Amy, is a good cup of tea with some honey in it to handle that cough. And I thank you very much for joining us tonight on short notice, which I appreciate it all the more.
Thank you.
Been a great pleasure. Thank you so much. And we are going to go to the newsroom in just a moment. And then in the second hour, an old friend joins us, Bruce Wallstad, who has often been on this program. He moved out of Chicago a few years ago, but we still managed to get him up here or get him on the phone occasionally to talk about the con games and the con rackets, which are always there. The con men and women are always plying their quite special trade to separate us from our money. Sometimes by appealing to our own sense of larceny, but more often just taking advantage of our own debility or our own confusion or our own decency and naivete. On to Bruce Wallstad as we talk about recent developments in the con rackets as they're worked upon ordinary citizens. Right now, though, to the WGN newsroom and Dave Schwann.